On a quiet morning, thousands of people trusted a bridge with their lives. Cars rolled forward, buses followed, workers stood still. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them disappeared. Steel screamed, concrete cracked, water swallowed voices. Dozens died in seconds. But what shocked the nation even more was not the collapse itself. It was what happened next. Reports vanished, truth was buried, and the government tried to erase a tragedy that should never have happened. Welcome to Untold Golden History. Today, we uncover the true story of a deadly bridge collapse in the United States, a disaster born from speed, corruption, and silence. This is not just a story about steel and concrete. It is a story about human lives, broken families, cruelty, innocence, and a truth someone desperately wanted to hide. In the years following World War II, America was changing fast. Cities were growing, factories were expanding, roads stretched farther than ever before. The nation believed in progress, speed, and power, and bridges became symbols of that belief. One such bridge was planned to connect two major towns separated by a wide, restless river. Before the bridge, travel took hours. With the bridge, it would take minutes. Local newspapers called it a lifeline of prosperity. Politicians praised it as proof that America was moving forward. The design was approved quickly. Too quickly. Engineers raised concerns about the river's strong currents and unstable soil beneath it. Some warned that the steel quality needed improvement. Others asked for more time to test the foundations. But time was expensive, and elections were close. A powerful construction company won the contract. They had political connections. They promised speed. They promised savings. And most importantly, they promised silence. Construction began almost immediately. Day and night, workers labored under pressure. Welders rushed. Inspectors were discouraged from writing reports. Corners were cut quietly. Lower-grade steel replaced stronger materials. Concrete was poured before it fully set. Some workers noticed cracks early on, thin, hairline fractures that shouldn't have been there. When they spoke up, supervisors told them, "Do your job and keep quiet." The bridge rose anyway, towering, proud, and beautiful from a distance. When it finally opened, a ribbon was cut. Cameras flashed. Smiles were wide. No one mentioned the warnings. No one talked about the shortcuts. And no one imagined what would come next. It was a normal weekday morning. Traffic was heavy. Commuters were late for work. School buses crossed the bridge with laughing children inside. Delivery trucks rumbled forward, loaded with goods. The bridge carried far more weight than it was designed to handle. At exactly 8:42 a.m., a loud metallic bang echoed across the river. Drivers thought it was a tire explosion. Pedestrians stopped and looked around. Then the shaking began. The road surface trembled violently. Steel beams twisted like paper. One support column snapped at its base. In less than 10 seconds, the center span collapsed. Cars plunged into the river below. A bus flipped mid-air before vanishing into the water. Concrete slabs crushed everything beneath them. Screams filled the air, then silence. Survivors clung to debris. Some tried to swim but were dragged under by the current. Others were trapped inside vehicles, pounding on windows that would never open again. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Firefighters jumped into the river without hesitation. Police pulled bodies from the water. Doctors worked on the injured right there on the riverbank. By nightfall, the official death count was announced, but insiders knew the number was far higher. Families waited at hospitals, holding photos of missing loved ones. Mothers cried. Children asked questions no one could answer.
And while the nation mourned, something darker was already unfolding behind closed doors. Within hours of the collapse, the government held a press conference. They stood in front of microphones with serious faces and rehearsed words. This was an unfortunate accident caused by natural factors, one official said. An unexpected structural failure, another added. There is no evidence of negligence. Reporters asked hard questions. Why had inspections been skipped? Why were warning signs ignored? Why did survivors report hearing cracks long before the collapse? The answers were vague. Documents were under review. Investigations were ongoing. Behind the scenes, panic spread. Emails were deleted. Inspection logs were edited. Witness statements were rewritten. Engineers who raised concerns were told not to speak to the media. Some were threatened with job loss. Others were offered promotions in exchange for silence. Families of the victims were promised compensation, but only if they agreed not to ask questions. Autopsy reports were delayed. Independent investigators were denied access to the site. The bridge debris was removed faster than normal before proper analysis could be done. Truth was being erased piece by piece. Among the engineers involved in the project was a quiet man named Daniel Harper. He had worked on bridges for over 20 years. He loved precision. He believed in safety. Weeks before the collapse, Daniel filed a written warning. He stated clearly that the load-bearing joints were unstable. His report was ignored. After the disaster, Daniel was called into a closed-door meeting. Officials thanked him for his service. Then they told him to forget what he knew. But Daniel couldn't sleep. He saw the faces of the victims on the news. He remembered the cracks, the shortcuts, the lies. One night, he opened his old files. He copied documents, photos, emails. He knew what he was doing was dangerous, but for the first time in his life, fear mattered less than truth. As weeks passed, the nation slowly moved on. But for the families, time stood still. A father waited every day for a son who would never come home. A wife kept setting an extra plate at dinner. A child asked why her mother stopped calling. Memorials were built, flowers faded, but questions remained unanswered. Daniel watched all of this quietly. He carried guilt like a weight on his chest, and he knew that staying silent made him part of the cruelty. One night, he made a decision that would change everything.
Daniel Harper knew the moment he decided to speak that there would be no turning back. He was not a famous man. He had no political power. He was just an engineer who believed bridges should not kill people. The documents he copied told a terrifying story. Test reports showed steel strength far below safety standards. Emails revealed pressure from officials to speed things up. One message even joked about the bridge holding long enough for the ribbon cutting. Daniel's hands trembled as he read those words again. He thought of the morning of the collapse. He had been driving to work when traffic suddenly stopped. Sirens screamed past him. Later, he saw the smoke rising over the river. That night, he learned that 37 people were officially dead. Unofficially, rescue workers whispered the number was closer to 60. Daniel shut his laptop and stared into the darkness. He realized something painful. The bridge had not failed suddenly. It had been dying from the moment it was built. A week later, Daniel was visited at home. 2 men in dark suits stood at his door. They smiled politely, but did not give their names. They said they were checking in on employees involved in the bridge project. They asked how Daniel was coping. Then they asked what he remembered. Daniel chose his words carefully. He spoke slowly. He avoided details. One of the men leaned forward and said quietly, "You understand this was a natural disaster. These things happen."
Daniel's stomach tightened. He nodded but said nothing. Before leaving, the other man placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It would be a shame," he said softly, "if misunderstandings caused unnecessary trouble." That night, Daniel realized he was being watched. His phone buzzed with unknown calls that went silent when he answered. Emails disappeared from his inbox. A black car appeared across the street more than once. Fear crept into his life like a shadow. But fear was not stronger than guilt. Across the city, investigative journalist Emily Carter was not satisfied with the official story. She had covered disasters before. She recognized the signs of a cover-up. Rushed cleanups, limited access, officials repeating the same phrases. Emily requested inspection records. She was denied. She interviewed survivors who described hearing cracking sounds long before the collapse. One survivor told her, "It felt like the bridge was warning us." Emily followed the money trail. The construction company had donated heavily to political campaigns. Several safety inspectors had been replaced months before the collapse. Still, she needed proof. One evening, she received an anonymous email. It contained a single sentence: "The bridge did not fail, it was failed." Attached were documents, Daniel Harper's documents. Emily and Daniel met in a quiet diner outside the city. Daniel looked older than his years. Dark circles framed his eyes. His voice shook as he spoke. He told her everything: the rushed construction, the ignored warnings, the threats. Emily listened without interrupting. She had heard stories like this before, but never with evidence this strong. "This will destroy them," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "I know," he replied, "and it might destroy me too." Emily promised him anonymity. She promised protection, but deep down they both knew promises could break. When Emily's article was published, it exploded across the country. Headlines screamed, "Deadly bridge collapse linked to corruption and negligence. Documents reveal government cover-up." Families of victims felt anger replace their grief. Protests erupted near government buildings. Candles burned alongside signs demanding justice. Officials denied everything. They called the documents misleading. They accused the journalist of spreading fear. They questioned Daniel's credibility without naming him. But it was too late. More insiders came forward. Former inspectors admitted they were told to stay silent. Construction workers described unsafe practices. The truth spread like fire. Daniel lost his job within days. The official reason was department restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. His bank accounts were audited. His professional license was questioned. Old mistakes from decades ago were suddenly remembered. Emily faced pressure too. Advertisers pulled out. Anonymous threats filled her inbox. One message read simply, "Stop digging." She didn't. Under public pressure, a formal investigation was announced. A courtroom filled with families, reporters, and officials. Daniel testified behind a screen. His voice cracked as he described the ignored warnings. He spoke of fear, of guilt, of lives lost because speed mattered more than safety. Lawyers attacked him aggressively. They called him bitter. They said he was seeking attention. But then Emily presented the documents, emails, reports, proof. Silence fell over the room. For the first time, officials looked afraid. Victims' families testified too. A mother spoke of her daughter's last phone call from the bridge. A husband described identifying his wife by her wedding ring. A child held a photograph and asked one question: why didn't they fix it? No one answered. Tears filled the courtroom. Even hardened lawyers looked away. The final report confirmed what many already knew. The bridge collapse was not an accident. It was caused by negligence, corruption, and deliberate suppression of safety concerns. Several officials resigned quietly. One faced criminal charges. The construction company paid settlements but admitted no due wronging. No sentence could bring the dead back. Justice felt incomplete. Years later, new laws were passed. Stricter safety regulations, independent inspections, whistleblower protections. Daniel found work teaching engineering ethics. He told his students one lesson again and again. A bridge is not just steel. It carries trust. Emily continued her career, her name now nationwide. She never forgot the man who risked everything to tell the truth. The river still flows where the bridge once stood. A memorial stands nearby, names carved in stone, flowers placed gently, silence heavy with memory. The government tried to bury the truth, but truth, like water, always finds a way to rise, and this story remains, a warning carved into history.
The public believed the story was over. A bridge had fallen, officials had resigned, laws had changed. For most Americans, that was enough. But for the families who lost loved ones, and for Daniel Harper, the story was far from finished. Because while the investigation revealed how the bridge collapsed, it carefully avoided a deeper question. Who truly ordered the silence? Daniel noticed something strange when the final report was released. Lower-level officials were blamed, middle managers resigned, a single executive from the construction company faced trial. But the names at the very top, the ones who approved budgets, timelines, and safety exemptions, were missing. Daniel recognized those names. He had seen them in emails. He had heard them mentioned in private meetings. They were powerful, and they were untouched. Emily Carter saw it too. She called Daniel one late night. They cut the story in half, she said. They gave the public enough truth to calm them down, but not enough to change the system. Daniel closed his eyes. The guilt returned like an old wound. How many bridges are still standing like this? He asked. Emily didn't answer. Years earlier, during construction, Daniel had written one final report. It was longer than the others, more detailed, more urgent. He warned that if heavy traffic increased, as projections showed, it could trigger a progressive collapse. He printed 3 copies. One disappeared from his desk. One was returned with red markings and the word excessive written across it. The third he kept. That third copy was not included in the investigation. Daniel now realized why. Months after the trial, Emily received another message. This one came from a former budget analyst inside the Department of Transportation. Her name was Rachel Monroe. Rachel had approved emergency funding for the bridge, funding that was later reduced without explanation. When she questioned it, she was told the money had been reallocated. Reallocated where? No one would say. Rachel stayed silent for years. Then she saw Emily's reporting, and something inside her broke. Rachel met Emily in secret. She brought spreadsheets, internal memos, bank transfers routed through shell companies. Together, Emily and Rachel followed the money. It led to private contractors, political donors, and finally to offshore accounts linked to high-ranking officials. The bridge had not just been rushed, it had been harvested. Every shortcut created profit, every ignored warning saved money, and every saved dollar found its way upward. Rachel lost her job within 2 weeks. Her house was audited, her past was investigated, old tax filings were questioned. She called Emily one night in tears. "They're trying to break me," she said. "They want me to disappear." Emily published the story anyway. This time, the reaction was different. People were no longer shocked, they were angry. Trust collapsed faster than the bridge ever did.
Protests spread nationwide, not just about the bridge, but about infrastructure everywhere. Citizens asked dangerous questions. How many inspections are fake? How many disasters were preventable? How many lives were traded for profit? The government responded with calm words and closed doors. Daniel watched the protests on television. He realized something painful. The bridge collapse was not an exception, it was a symptom, a system built on speed over safety, profit over people, silence over truth. He stood before his engineering students and told them something he had never said before. "Rules do not protect lives," he said. "People do." Some students looked uncomfortable, others listened closely. One evening, Daniel returned home to find smoke rising from his garage. Firefighters arrived quickly. They called it an electrical failure, but Daniel noticed something strange. The fire had started near a box containing his old documents, the ones he never shared. They were gone, burned completely. Daniel said nothing. He understood the message. Emily's newspaper faced lawsuits. Sponsors withdrew funding. Editors urged her to slow down. One senior editor pulled her aside. "You've done your part. Don't become the story." Emily looked at him and replied, "The story doesn't end just because it's uncomfortable." She resigned the next day. Freed from corporate pressure, Emily partnered with independent journalists. They published everything, no redactions, no softened language. The report showed a pattern across multiple states: rushed construction, altered inspections, silenced engineers. The bridge was only the most visible failure. Among the readers was Maria Alvarez, whose husband died in the collapse. She had stayed quiet through the trials, through the settlements, through the apologies. But when she read the full report, something changed. She stood before a city council meeting and spoke publicly for the first time. "My husband trusted that bridge," she said. "He trusted this country." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "You didn't just kill him, you erased him." The room was silent. New investigations were announced, then quietly delayed. Files went missing, witnesses backed out. Rachel Monroe moved out of state under a different name. Emily received a final warning. Accidents happen, so do consequences. But something unexpected happened. Young engineers began speaking out. Students demanded ethics reforms. Independent inspectors refused bribes. The culture began to crack, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Daniel visited the memorial one evening. He stood before the names carved in stone. He whispered an apology. "I should have been louder," he said. A child nearby placed a flower beneath one of the names. Daniel realized then the truth had cost him everything, but silence would have cost the future.
Daniel stayed at the memorial long after the sun disappeared. The river reflected the city lights, calm now as if it had never taken lives. But Daniel knew better. Water remembered. So did concrete. So did people. As he walked away, he felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not guilt, but clarity. The truth was out, but accountability was still missing. And without accountability, history would repeat itself. 2 years after the collapse, plans for a new bridge were announced. This time, officials promised transparency. Independent inspectors were hired. Public meetings were held. Cameras were everywhere. But Daniel noticed something familiar. The same construction company, under a different name, was involved. The same subcontractors, the same consultants, only the logos had changed. Emily noticed it too. She had been living quietly, freelancing under smaller outlets. Her name still triggered reactions, admiration from some, fear from others. She sent Daniel a message. They learned how to hide better, not how to change. During the early phase of construction, a young structural engineer named Michael Reeves raised concerns.
He was fresh out of graduate school, idealistic, unafraid. He posted a technical analysis online, explaining how load calculations were still being underestimated. Within days, the post was taken down. Michael was called into a meeting. 2 weeks later, he resigned. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, his career ended before it began. Daniel reached out to him. Michael replied with one sentence, "I thought truth was enough." Daniel remembered his own first day as an engineer. He had believed numbers were honest, that equations could not lie. No one told him that people could, that budgets could bend physics, that silence could be engineered. The towns on both sides of the river never truly healed. Small businesses closed after the collapse. Tourism died. Families moved away. At night, locals swore they could still hear the bridge, metal groaning, echoes of impact. Children grew up knowing which road to avoid. Parents warned them, never trust shortcuts. One afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected call. A senior government official, someone who had survived the first scandal, wanted to meet. They chose a private office, no assistants, no recording devices. The official spoke calmly. "You've made your point," he said. "The country has moved on." Daniel looked at him and replied, "The families haven't." The man sighed. "You're damaging trust in institutions." Daniel didn't raise his voice. "No," he said, "you're confusing trust with obedience." The meeting ended quickly. Daniel knew then that the system would never confess fully. Emily took one final risk. She began compiling a long-term study, bridges, tunnels, highways, all linked by the same patterns. She worked quietly, no headlines, no leaks, just facts. One night, she called Daniel. "If anything happens to me," she said, "promise me you'll release it." Daniel promised. 3 months later, Emily was injured in a car accident. It was ruled a random collision. Her injuries were not fatal, but severe enough to end her field work. From her hospital bed, she whispered to Daniel, "They don't need to silence me anymore. They just need time." Daniel kept his promise. He released Emily's study online. It spread slowly at first, then faster. Engineers shared it. Universities discussed it. International watchdogs took notice. The bridge collapse was no longer a single story. It was evidence of a national pattern. Foreign media began reporting on it. International engineers criticized U.S. oversight. Allies questioned safety standards. For the first time, the government faced embarrassment, not just anger. Embarrassment demanded response. A national commission was formed, not to investigate one bridge, but the entire system. Daniel was invited to testify publicly. He stood before lawmakers with steady hands. He spoke about pressure, about fear, about the cost of silence. He ended with one sentence: "You cannot build trust the same way you build bridges, by hiding cracks." Something unexpected happened. A senior lawmaker broke ranks. He admitted publicly that safety reports were often altered to meet deadlines. The room went silent. Then another spoke, then another. The wall cracked. Contracts were canceled. Executives were charged. Agencies were restructured. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was real. Years later, the new bridge finally opened. There were no fireworks, no politicians smiling for cameras, just engineers, inspectors, families of the victims. At the memorial, a young boy asked his mother, why did the old bridge fall? She answered softly, because people forgot that lives matter. The boy thought for a moment and said, then we should remember.
The first car crossed the new bridge slowly. Its tires rolled over the smooth surface without a sound. No shaking,
No warning cracks, just quiet movement from one side of the river to the other. People watching held their breath without realizing it. When the car reached the far end, someone began to clap. Then another. Soon the sound spread, not loud, not joyful, but relieved. Daniel did not clap. He watched the river instead. Because bridges could be rebuilt, trust was harder. In the months following the opening, reports showed a change. Inspections increased nationwide. Budgets were reviewed line by line. Anonymous reporting systems were introduced for engineers. On paper, the system looked safer, but Daniel knew systems did not change overnight. They changed when people refused to forget. Far from the cameras and commissions, there was a man named Thomas Reed. He had been a mid-level executive at the original construction company, not powerful enough to escape blame, not innocent enough to deserve forgiveness. When the collapse happened, Thomas followed orders. He approved reduced materials. He signed altered reports. He told himself it wasn't his decision. After the investigations, he was sentenced to prison. Inside his small cell, Thomas replayed the past endlessly. He remembered a meeting where an engineer begged for more time. He remembered laughing nervously and saying, "We'll manage." Now, time managed him. One evening, Thomas saw a news segment about the memorial. Families gathered, names read aloud. One name caught his attention. It belonged to a woman he had once passed on the bridge during construction. She had smiled politely as he walked by in a hard hat. Thomas covered his face with his hands. For the first time, he stopped blaming the system and started blaming himself. Daniel received a letter from prison. It was from Thomas Reed. The handwriting was shaky. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter read, "but I want you to know I understand now." Daniel read it twice. He did not reply. Some realizations came too late to heal wounds, but they mattered anyway. Emily recovered slowly. She walked with a limp now. Her hands sometimes shook. She no longer chased stories. But students, young journalists, came to visit her. They asked questions. They listened. Emily told them one thing again and again. Truth doesn't need heroes. It needs witnesses. Years passed. The towns near the bridge began to recover. New shops opened. Children played near the river again. But the memorial remained untouched. Every year on the anniversary of the collapse, families gathered. They did not talk about politics. They talked about birthdays missed, about voices remembered. Pain softened, but never disappeared. Daniel's classroom was always full, not because he was famous, but because he was honest. He showed students photos of the collapse. He showed them inspection reports. He asked one question: "Would you sign this?" Silence usually followed. That silence was the lesson. Even years later, Daniel remembered the sound, the scream of steel, the sudden absence of ground. Some nights he dreamed he was still on the bridge. In the dream he ran, but never fast enough. He woke with the same thought every time. Knowing is a responsibility. On the 10th anniversary of the collapse, the government released a final statement. It acknowledged failures. It honored victims. It promised vigilance. The words were careful, measured. Daniel read it quietly. Then he closed the document. Statements did not build bridges. Actions did. At the memorial, Daniel met Maria Alvarez again. Her hair had gone gray. Her eyes still held sadness, but also calm. "I used to hate everyone involved," she said, "but hate kept me stuck on that bridge." She placed flowers beneath her husband's name. I choose to remember him living, not dying." Daniel nodded. Forgiveness did not erase guilt, but it freed the living. Even with reforms, accidents still happened across the country. But something had changed. When cracks appeared, people listened. When engineers spoke, they were heard. Not always, but more often than before. The shadow of the collapsed bridge followed every decision. And that shadow saved lives. The young boy who once asked why the bridge fell was older now, a teenager. He stood at the memorial with a notebook. He was studying civil engineering. Daniel noticed him sketching the bridge. "You want to build bridges?" Daniel asked. The boy smiled. "I want to build safe ones." Daniel felt something warm in his chest. Hope. One evening, Daniel walked across the new bridge alone. Traffic had slowed. The river flowed quietly below. He stopped halfway and looked down. He thought of the dead, of the lies, of the truth that refused to stay buried. He whispered, "We remember," and kept walking.
Daniel reached the end of the bridge and did not turn back. For a long time, that bridge had been the center of his life, the place where everything broke, the place where truth finally stood upright. Now it was simply a crossing, and that, he realized, was the greatest victory. Years passed quietly, no headlines, no scandals tied to that river. But in classrooms, courtrooms, and construction sites across the country, the story lived on. It was taught not as a tragedy alone, but as a warning. Engineering textbooks referenced it. Ethics courses debated it. New inspectors memorized its failures. The bridge collapse became a case study titled "When Silence Becomes Deadly." There was one name the public never heard, a senior policymaker, not elected, not famous. He never signed a document ordering shortcuts, never sent an email demanding silence. He only asked questions like, "Can this be done faster? Do we really need that test? Will anyone notice?" Years later, retired and uncelebrated, he watched the new bridge from his car. Traffic flowed safely. People crossed without fear. He felt no pride, only a quiet, heavy understanding. Some crimes were committed by hands, others by hesitation. On a rainy afternoon, Daniel gave his final lecture before retirement. He did not use slides. He did not show charts. He told a story. He spoke of a bridge built too fast, of warnings ignored, of lives lost. And then he said something unexpected. "I was not brave," he told the room. "I was late." The students listened closely. "If I had spoken louder sooner," he continued, "some of those names would not be carved in stone." Silence filled the room. Then he smiled gently. "Do better than me." Emily wrote one last piece. It was not an investigation. It named no villains. It was titled, "What We Choose to See." She wrote about how disasters are rarely sudden, how they are built slowly through ignored warnings and comfortable lies. The article ended with one sentence: "The truth is patient, but it never forgets." She never published another story. She didn't need to. Thomas Reed was released quietly. No reporters waited, no apologies were demanded. He moved to a small town where no one knew his name. Every morning he walked past a modest bridge. He never crossed it without stopping first. Some punishments followed you forever. On the 20th anniversary of the collapse, families gathered again. Fewer now. Some had passed away. Some were too tired to return. But the names remained the same, unchanging, honest. A choir sang softly. Children released flowers into the river. The water carried them gently away. The boy, now a young man, stood beside Daniel. He had graduated. He wore an engineer's badge. "Do you think it was worth it?" he asked. "All the pain, all the loss?" Daniel looked at the bridge.
At the river? At the families? He answered slowly. No, he said, nothing makes that worth it. Then he added, but forgetting would have made it meaningless. That night the bridge stood under the stars, lights reflected off steel that no longer groaned under pressure, no hidden cracks, no rushed welds, just balance. Somewhere a driver crossed without thinking, a child slept in the back seat, a worker hummed to the radio. Life continued because someone, once, refused to stay silent. The government tried to cover it up. They nearly succeeded. But truth does not need permission. It only needs one voice. And once spoken, it echoes through rivers, through steel, through history. This was not just the story of a bridge. It was the story of choices, of cruelty disguised as efficiency, of innocence paying the price, and of realization arriving, too late for the dead, but just in time for the living. If this story moved you, don't look away. Follow this page and subscribe for more real stories they tried to hide.